The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as James folded the last chair and stacked it in the back of the community hall. It was nearly midnight, and the echo of laughter from the day's event had long faded. The mop handle leaned against the wall like a silent partner waiting for the final task to be done. James rolled up his sleeves, dipped the mop into the cold water bucket, and began wiping away the smudges of life left behind. He didn't check the clock. He never did. Time was something other people followed. For James, life moved by tasks, by shifts, by survival. There wasn't time for mornings or evenings, only beginnings and deadlines. Outside the city exhaled its usual exhaust. Neon signs blinked above empty sidewalks. Somewhere not too far, a bar still played 90s music to half-listening patrons. Inside the janitor's closet, James checked his supplies, made a mental note to pick up new gloves tomorrow, then locked the door behind him. He didn't notice the calendar taped to the inside of the locker door, or rather, he saw it, but it was like furniture. Always there, never registered. The square around today's date was circled in purple marker. His birthday. But James hadn't remembered. The bus ride home was quiet. Only a sleeping college kid slumped at the back and a nurse eating crackers from a foil packet. James sat by the window forehead against the cool glass and thought of Rent. And of Zoe, his daughter, 8 years old. Bright, always humming something. She'd begged him last week to let her stay up late and bake just one tiny cake. He'd said no. Work was piling up and they couldn't afford extra eggs. He hated saying no to her, but he hated having the power shut off more. At home, the light over the porch flickered once before turning off completely. He jiggled the key in the front door and stepped inside. The living room was dark except for the faint glow of a string of fairy lights taped around a cardboard fort. Inside, Zoe lay curled up with her sketchbook and a flashlight. She looked up and grinned sleepily. "Hi, Daddy." "Hey, Firefly," James whispered, trying not to sound as tired as he was. "You fall asleep waiting for me again." She nodded. "I drew you something, but you can't see it until tomorrow." "Fair enough," he kissed her forehead. "Get some sleep." He tucked a blanket around her and shuffled into the kitchen. The fridge hummed softly. A note was stuck to it with a crayon magnet. "Don't open this until tomorrow morning. Love, Zoe." He smiled faintly. Inside the fridge was probably her leftover school pudding, shed saved just for him. His eyes scanned the space, landing on a cracked jar of peanut butter and a bottle of tap water. He poured himself a glass, sat, thought about what bills were coming next. He didn't notice the small box wrapped in newspaper on top of the fridge. Didn't see the handmade card Zoe had slipped under his pillow. And he never remembered what day it was, but his daughter did, and she had a plan. Zoe waited until she heard the sound of her father's soft snore from the other room. It wasn't loud or rumbling. It was the kind of breath people make when they're too tired to even dream properly. The kind that made her chest hurt just a little. She tiptoed out of her cardboard fort, flashlight in hand, and crept across the living room floor to the old laptop her teacher had donated to her earlier that year. It was chipped at the corners and had to be plugged in constantly, or it would die after 10 minutes, but it worked. She had practiced typing this message for days in her notebook, crossing out words she thought sounded too grown up or not smart enough. Tonight it was time to send it. She opened the browser and typed in the email address she'd copied from the company flyer her dad had brought home, once not realizing she'd taken it from his bag, info@cranelabs.tech. It was the company where he cleaned on Thursday nights, the big shiny one where grown-ups wore shiny shoes and talked loudly in elevators. Zoe didn't know much about what they did, but she knew one important thing. The woman in charge, CEO Madeline Crane, had once come to speak at her school's career day. She was tall, wore pantsuits that shimmered like metal, and smiled in a way that made even the mean kids sit straighter. And she had said this one line Zoe never forgot: "Some of the best ideas in the world come from people no one's listening to." Zoe figured maybe she'd listen to her. Subject: a favor from my dad. "Hi, Ms. Madeline. My name is Zoe, and I am 9, almost 10, and my dad cleans your offices at night. His name is James. Today is his birthday, but he had to work because we don't have much money. He never celebrates anything, not even cake. He says it's fine, but I know it's not. He always smiles like he's okay, but I can tell when it's pretend. I want to do something nice for him. Not big, just so he knows someone sees him. I was thinking maybe you could help. I don't know how, but you're very powerful. Maybe you have something fancy you don't use, like a conference room with cake, or just a message that says, "Thank you for working so hard. I want him to feel special. Just once, please don't tell him I emailed." It's a surprise. "Thank you, even if you can't help. Love, Zoe, James' daughter." She clicked with send. The email whooshed away into cyberspace and Zoe let out a shaky breath. Her finger hovered over the trackpad. Should she delete it? What if she got her dad in trouble? What if it made things worse? But then she looked at the "don't open until tomorrow" note she had drawn for his pudding, and she remembered how he hadn't even realized what day it was. She closed the laptop and whispered into the dark, "Please answer." Meanwhile, in the Crane Tech Tower across town, a notification pinged on a screen in a corner office still faintly lit after hours. Madeline Crane, preparing to leave, paused at the subject line. "A favor for my dad." She almost skipped it, but then she didn't. The Crane Tech Tower stood like a lighthouse of glass and steel against the night sky, its logo glowing from 30 stories up. Inside, the hum of the day had faded into silence. Elevators slept. Meeting rooms sat empty. Only the occasional hum of motion sensors acknowledging life reminded the building it was still occupied. James adjusted the weight of the cleaning supply cart and pushed through the side service entrance. He always entered quietly. There was something sacred about after hours. No footsteps clattering through hallways, no phones ringing, just peace and the occasional squeaky wheel from his cart, which he kept meaning to oil well but never got around to. He started on the 24th floor, wiping down glossy surfaces and empty coffee mugs with practiced efficiency. At Crane Tech, even the air smelled expensive, filtered citrus clean, the kind of place where no fingerprints were supposed to be left behind. He was invisible here in a way that was strangely comforting. No one stopped him. No one questioned. The badge on his collar, the mop in his hand, the silence in his demeanor, it all kept him outside the circle of notice. But tonight would be different. Madeline Crane was still in her office. It was unusual. She preferred to leave by 8 hours and review late reports from home. But something had kept her anchored to her desk tonight. Something or someone. That email from a little girl named Zoe. She'd reread it 3 times between Zoom meetings, each time feeling her chest tighten with something she hadn't expected memory. A childhood of her own spent watching her father come home in the dark exhausted. A single plate on the table, a man too proud to admit when things were hard. And a little girl who sometimes wanted to say, "Let me help," but didn't know how. So tonight she stayed. Madeline stood at her office window, gazing down at the quiet city when a small reflection in the glass caught her attention. Movement. Down the hall through the open conference room doors, a man in a worn Navy uniform cleaned the long glass table with gentle circular motions. She didn't recognize him, but she recognized the way he moved. Carefully, like someone who didn't want to disturb anything. James was nearly finished when he heard footsteps. He glanced up expecting security, but instead he saw a tall woman in a tailored black blazer, her heels clicking softly on the floor. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, quickly straightening. "I didn't know anyone was still here." Madeline smiled, hands in her pockets. "No apology needed. You're just doing your job." He nodded, uncertain. Most execs didn't talk to him unless something had gone wrong. Broken coffee machine. Overflowing bin. She took a few steps closer, glancing at the pristine table. "You do good work," she said. He gave a small, polite smile. "Thank you. What's your name, James?" "James Elwood." A pause. "You've worked here long?" He shrugged. "A while. Nights only." She looked at him closely, his posture, the shadows under his eyes, the way he stood tall anyway. "I'm Madeline," she said, as if it were nothing. He nodded, not placing her name. "Nice to meet you." She didn't correct him. Not yet. Instead, she offered something softer than formality. "I got a message today," she said, "from someone named Zoe." James stiffened. "That's my daughter. She's quite a kid." His brows furrowed. "She wrote you?" Madeline smiled. "She asked for something very simple. A moment for someone who deserves to be seen." James blinked, unsure how to respond. He didn't like charity. Never had. He worked because he believed in earning things, not asking for them. "She shouldn't have bothered you." "She didn't," Madeline cut in gently. "She reminded me of something I'd forgotten. And I'm glad she did." There was a silence between them, not awkward, but full of things unspoken. Finally, Madeline gestured to the window. City looks different from up here, doesn't it? James followed her gaze. Yeah, makes everything feel smaller. But you don't, she said quietly. And then she nodded once respectfully and walked away, leaving James standing in the conference room, unsure why a few kind words had just shaken him more than a long day ever could. The alarm buzzed at 6 a.m., same as always. James groaned softly, rolled out of the stiff mattress, and rubbed the back of his neck. The sun hadn't even broken over the rooftops, but his day had already started in his head list of chores, upcoming bills, a call from the school nurse about Zoe's missing paperwork. He opened the fridge. 3 eggs, half a jar of pickles, and 2 slices of bread. He made toast and coffee, skipping the eggs. Zoe loved scrambled eggs. He didn't. Zoe wandered into the kitchen 10 minutes later, eyes still foggy from sleep, her hair a wild crown of curls. She plopped onto a rickety stool and leaned her chin into her hands. "Mornin', Daddy. Mornin', Peanut," he said with a tired smile, setting toast and a juice box in front of her. She paused for a moment, watching him sip his black coffee. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded paper. "I drew something for you at school yesterday." James raised a brow and accepted the picture. It was a crayon drawing of the two of them. Zoe had given herself a pink cape and him a janitor's cart with rockets. "Rocket Dad, huh?" she giggled. "You clean at the speed of light." He laughed genuinely. "Best superhero name I've ever had." She watched him carefully. Not a flicker, not a clue that today was supposed to be different. No mention of the calendar, no glance at the envelope she had hidden in his coat pocket the night before, and not even a hint of disappointment when he gathered his bag and said, "Another double shift tonight. Be good for Mrs. Alvarez after school, all right?" "Okay, Daddy," she said, brightly. He ruffled her hair and kissed her on the forehead. Zoe waited until the door clicked shut before her shoulders sank. "Okay," she whispered, climbing onto the counter and pulling a box from above the cabinet. Inside were 2 balloons, a store-brand cake mix, and a little card shed made. But she wasn't going to use them. Not yet. Not until the real plan unfolded. She ran to the donated laptop and checked her email again. There it was, a favor for my dad. She opened it slowly, breath caught in her throat. "Dear Zoe, thank you for your message. It moved me deeply. I would love to help. I have something in mind. Let's make your dad's birthday special quietly and in a way he'll never forget. Can you keep a secret a little longer?" Madeline, Zoe smiled. This wasn't just any birthday now. It was going to be the one he remembered for the rest of his life. Madeline Crane wasn't known for staying late 2 nights in a row. Her assistant had even raised an eyebrow that morning. "Another late shift, Ms. Crane," Shed offered a neutral smile. "Some things are more important than schedules." She didn't explain further. She never did. But in her briefcase was a neatly folded printout of Zoe's email tucked between quarterly projections and international licensing reports. By 8:45 p.m., the 24th floor was quiet again, except for the faint hum of ventilation and the soft swish of mop strokes down the hall. Madeline stood in her office doorway watching James Elwood work. He was thorough. Not fast, not lazy, deliberate. He moved from desk to desk like someone who understood that every fingerprint he wiped away belonged to someone with a job, a struggle, maybe even a secret. He wasn't cleaning surfaces. He was restoring order to something that most people would never notice. That kind of respect for work couldn't be taught. She followed him with her eyes as he reached the end of the hallway, pushing open the door to the staff lounge. She didn't plan to follow, but just as the door swung open, she heard a small voice in awe. "Zoe!" Madeline blinked, startled. "I think he thinks I forgot," Zoe said softly. "He acts like he doesn't care, but he always pretends his birthday isn't real. Like if no one says anything, it won't hurt." Madeline moved closer, careful not to interrupt. Through the narrow crack, she could see Zoe sitting on one of the cushioned bench's legs, swinging, speaking to one of the night staff babysitters, probably arranged by the after-school program for emergencies. Zoe sighed. "I just want him to have one day where someone says he matters." Madeline stepped back. Something in her chest pulled tight, not guilt, not pity. Something else. Recognition. It was a longing she hadn't realized still lived inside her. Later that night, James stepped into the elevator to go home, unaware that a floor above him, a powerful woman was rewriting her entire Thursday schedule. And in her office, beside a framed company plaque, she took out Zoe's drawing and pinned it to the wall. "Rocket Dad," she murmured, smiling. Then she picked up her phone. Rachel, cancel the board dinner next week. I need that private dining room and send me catering options for chocolate cake. Yes, with sprinkles. Zoe had never written an email to a CEO before. She wasn't even sure how to spell executive, so she looked it up twice. Her fingers hovered nervously over the worn keyboard, the one her dad had bought secondhand, and fixed with tape in quiet determination. She glanced at the crumpled paper in her lap, her third draft of the letter, then back at the blinking cursor. The email address was still open on her screen, Emily Crane, CraneTechGlobal.com. She had found it by guessing after snooping around on her dad's old pay stubs to figure out who the CEO was. She knew it was bold, maybe even too bold, but he deserved something bold. With a deep breath, she began to type. Subject, my dad's birthday. Dear Ms. Crane, hi, my name is Zoe. I am 9.5. My dad works at your company at night. He's the janitor with the cart that squeaks sometimes. His name is James Elwood. Tomorrow is his birthday. He won't say anything. He never does. I think he forgets on purpose because he doesn't want anyone to feel bad. But I remember, he works all the time and never buys anything for himself. He even gave away his gloves last week to a homeless man outside the bus station. My dad says, we don't have a lot of money, but we're rich in spirit. I don't really know what that means, but I think it's true. I know you're really busy and important and probably get a lot of emails. But I was wondering, could you help me surprise him? Maybe something small at work, like a card or cake, or even just tell him happy birthday when he's not expecting it. I think it would mean a lot. Thank you for reading this. Zoe Elwood. Zoe stared at the screen for a full minute. Then she hit send before she could change her mind. On the 25th floor, not far from where her father would be mopping in a few hours, Madeline Crane's phone buzzed softly with the incoming message. She didn't open it right away. She didn't need to. The subject line was enough to stop her cold. My dad's birthday. And in that moment, the CEO of a global tech empire leaned back in her leather chair, eyes misting, whispering only 2 words to the silence of her glass-walled office. Let's begin. It started with a knock on the classroom door. Zoe was halfway through coloring a picture of her dad fixing a rocket-shaped vacuum cleaner when Mrs. Lane poked her head in, her smile a little too wide. Zoe, sweetie, there's someone here who wants to speak with you. Zoe looked up, heart skipping. She followed her teacher through the quiet hallway toward the front office, clutching her sketchbook tightly. At the entrance stood Mrs. Alvarez, her after-school neighbor and part-time babysitters, miling nervously beside a woman Zoe didn't recognize. Tall, sharp, in a charcoal gray blazer, but warm-eyed. The woman bent slightly and extended her hand. Hi, Zoe. I'm Madeline. Zoe blinked. Madeline, as in the CEO. The CEO. You're real, she whispered. Madeline chuckled. I get that a lot. Mrs. Alvarez offered a comforting squeeze on Zoe's shoulder. Don't worry, I'm staying with you. Zoe nodded shyly. They climbed into a quiet black car that didn't smell like anything except leather and mint tea. It wasn't until they were inside a sunlit conference room filled with balloons, blueprints, and a surprisingly large cake catalog that Zoe realized this wasn't a meeting. It was a mission. Madeline set a tablet on the table and turned it toward Zoe. I read your email, every word of it, and I think your dad deserves the birthday of a lifetime. The only question is, how do we make it happen without him knowing? Zoe's eyes widened. You're serious as a spreadsheet, Madeline said, smiling. Operation Rocket Dad begins today. Zoe leaned forward. Okay, first he really likes chocolate, not the fancy kind, the one with the caramel inside. Noted. And he always says he hates attention, but he really just hates being embarrassed. So low-key, subtle, but unforgettable. Zoe nodded. Exactly. Madeline slid a notepad across the table. You're the boss today, Zoe. Tell me what you have in mind. They spent nearly an hour planning. There would be candles, but not 39 of them, just one big gold star. There would be cake, but it would arrive accidentally in the break room. And there would be one moment, just one, when the building's loudspeaker would play a song Zoe had secretly written on her dad's guitar, recorded on her teacher's phone. It's called The Man Who Fixes Everything, Zoe explained. Madeline didn't speak for a second. Then she said, I want that to be the new starred-up sound when my company boots up. Zoe laughed. Really, really? As they walked her back to school, Zoe turned and asked quietly, why are you helping me? Madeline paused. Because a long time ago, she said someone helped me, and I never got the chance to thank them. Maybe this is my way. Zoe looked thoughtful, then held out her pinky. Promise you won't let him feel small. Madeline took her hand without hesitation. Promise, It started with a whisper in the mailroom. Then a sticky note passed discreetly between departments. By noon, even the building security guard had been briefed with a single sentence and a knowing smile. Keep him near the east elevator at 6:05. Trust us, no one told James Elwood. That was the point. While he went about his night shift, checking bulbs, emptying bins, straightening desks, the quiet wheels of something much larger were turning behind the scenes. In the HR department, Angela, the usually no-nonsense payroll officer, was hunched over a balloon pump, whispering, "If anyone tells him before tomorrow, I swear he'll audit your snacks." In the break room, someone slipped a playlist onto the speaker system titled Rocket Dad. No one asked what it meant, but by the second listen, they were all humming along. Madeline had kept her promise subtle but unforgettable. At home, Zoe was a whirlwind of focus. She baked a test cupcake for the big day and drew decorations with dollar store glitter pens. Mrs. Alvarez helped her glue construction paper stars onto tiny sticks, each one with a note, for the best fixer in the galaxy. Dad's gonna cry, Zoe said matter-of-factly, holding one up. Mrs. Alvarez smiled. Good, let him. Meanwhile, across town, a caterer puzzled over a strange delivery request. One caramel chocolate cake, basic icing, no writing. But the candle must be a gold star. Exactly, Madeline had said. Simple, but make it sacred. At 11 p.m., James clocked into work just like every other night. He noticed nothing unusual except perhaps the mop bucket was slightly shinier, and maybe someone had left fresh paper in the printer tray. The night shift buzzed on as all was, but behind every door, every desk, every slightly too clean hallway, someone was watching the clock. 6:05 was coming, and with it a surprise that didn't cost much, but might mean everything. At 4:37 p.m., the message came in. James, we're short-staffed tonight. Can you cover an extra shift at the South Warehouse? James stared at his phone, already dressed for his regular janitorial shift at Crane Tech HQ. The South Warehouse paid slightly better. It was grittier work, colder floors, fewer lights, but more hours meant another grocery bag, another medical bill, chipped away. His thumb hovered over yes. Then Zoe walked into the room, backpack sliding off one shoulder. Hey, Dad, she said cheerfully, trying to sound casual. You heading to the office already? He nodded. Yeah, might be a late one tonight. She paused too still for a second. Do you have to go to the same place? James furrowed his brow. Maybe. I just got offered a shift at the warehouse. Why? Zoe blinked fast. Oh, no reason. I like when you're at the office. Feels safer. That landed harder than she meant. James sighed. You okay, Peanut? She nodded too quickly. I just like knowing you're somewhere with windows, she mumbled, heading into the kitchen. Not somewhere cold. James glanced again at his phone. The warehouse would mean $40 extra. But suddenly the idea of a cold, empty warehouse floor felt heavier than usual. He stared at Zoe's sketchbook lying on the table, the corner poking out a cartoon rocket ship, and a janitor holding a mop like a lightsaber. He picked up the phone again. Message typed, sorry, can't make it tonight, sent. Back at Crane Tech HQ, the countdown was ticking. At 5:40, the building began to shift. Desks were quietly cleared. A printer jam was manufactured to keep James near the east hallway. Someone lit the single gold star candle and nervously hovered near the light switch. But upstairs, Madeline stood still at her window watching the city. He's going to show up, she said softly to her assistant, more to herself than anyone else. He always does, the assistant replied. The good ones show up even when it's easier not to. And down in the lobby with worn boots and a tired smile, James scanned in. He had no idea what was coming. But he had chosen again not the path that paid more, but the one that meant something. At 5:58 p.m., James was deep in the sub-level store room, replacing a flickering motion sensor. He hadn't meant to take the task, it wasn't even on his checklist. But a rushed engineer had flagged him on the way in. Can you just take a quick look? It's been triggering false alarms all day. So there he was, crouched beneath a ceiling panel with a borrowed screwdriver, while 30 floors above his name was about to echo through a glowing room filled with paper stars, curious co-workers, and one very determined little girl. Upstairs, Zoe stood on her toes watching the elevator. The building clock struck 6 hours. Nothing. Madeline leaned down. You said he's always on time. Zoe whispered. He is. At that moment, James' walkie crackled. Base to James, where are you? We kinda need you on 31. He froze. 31. I'm in the basement. What's going on? Something with the lights come up now. It's important. James sighed. He looked back at the half-fixed panel, then down at his hands grimy scratched. The familiar tug of responsibility pulled at him again. Can it wait? He asked out loud to no one. Duty had always been his default. Fix the problem. Be the steady hand. Sacrifice now, celebrate later, if at all. He pulled out his phone to text Zoe he might be late again. But then he saw it, her lock screen photo. Zoe missing a tooth holding up a hand-drawn birthday card that said, "One day I'll buy you a rocket." And for once, he hesitated long enough for fate to intervene. James, come up, the voice said again. Just trust us. He stood up slowly. Copy that. On my way. The elevator was strangely empty, almost too quiet. As it climbed, James wiped his hands on a rag and checked his shirt for dust. Floor 10, floor 17, floor 24. He didn't know why his heart was racing. At 6:06 p.m., the doors opened to a darkened hallway. No alarms, no burnout lights. Just silence in one small voice from around the corner. Now suddenly, whoosh! The overheads flickered on. Confetti streamed from the vents. The break room doors swung open to a chorus of voices. Happy birthday! Mr. Elwood James stood frozen. And there in the center of the room was Zoe, wearing a construction paper crown and beaming like the sun. James had barely stepped into the brightly lit office party when it all began to blur. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. Not here, not anywhere. People clapped, streamers floated. A lopsided banner read, Happy Birthday, James Rocket Dad. He blinked. Rocket Dad, then he saw it. Zoe's artwork plastered across the break room walls, rockets, stars, doodles of him, holding a mop like a sword and fixing elevators with a cape on. There were cupcakes shaped like planets, a balloon that said Mission Dad Possible, and then there she was right in front of him. Zoe, wearing the same glittery crown she made in second-grade art class, holding a single candle shaped like a golden star. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. Daddy, she said, you always work, even on your birthday. You give and fix and carry things. So we wanted to carry this day for you. James tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Zoe stepped aside. Behind her, the CEO herself, Madeline, stood with a kind smile and a handwritten letter in her grasp. We thought we were celebrating your birthday, she said, but really we're just catching up. You've been giving to this place for years. We're just finally showing up in return. James shook his head slowly, overwhelmed. Why? Why all this? Zoe grinned. Because you never asked for anything. Madeline nodded. Because you remind people what showing up really means. Tears threatened, but he let them come. And when Zoe took his hand and pulled him forward, guiding him toward the cake, the candles flickering in star-shaped glory, he no longer felt like the man in the shadows. He felt seen, celebrated, loved. After the cake was cut and laughter softened into warm conversations, Madeline stepped forward, quieting the room with a gentle tap of her glass. Zoe nudged her father's elbow. She's going to talk about you. James looked around nervously. To all these people, but Madeline's gaze wasn't formal. It was personal. She smiled and eyes shining, not with power, but memory. I want to tell you a story. She began, her voice steady. I was 80 years old when my father lost his job. We went from steak dinners to skipping meals almost overnight. One winter, our heater gave out, and he sold his toolbox, his favorite thing in the world, just to keep us warm. The room fell silent. No one knew, she continued, because he never told anyone. He just kept showing up. Cleaning snow off neighbors' porches, fixing broken fences for free, helping elderly ladies load groceries, not for recognition, but because it was right. She turned to James. When I heard what Zoe had planned and how you almost missed this because of work, it felt familiar. That quiet dignity, that invisible sacrifice. I realized you remind me of him. James blinked, taken aback. I never got to thank my father properly, she said. He passed before I made it here. She reached into her coat and pulled out a slim envelope, offering it with both hands. But maybe I can thank him through you. James opened it. Inside was a letter of appointment, an offer. Full-time facilities manager. Benefits. Flexibility to pick up Zoe. a mentor position in their new apprentice program, and one handwritten note in blue ink: "The people who work in the shadows keep the lights on for the rest of us. We see you now." James looked up overwhelmed. Zoe whispered, "You don't have to fix everything alone anymore." And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to accept help, not out of weakness, but as a reward for a life well lived. James stood at the front desk of Crane Tech HQ, not in a janitor's uniform, but in a neatly pressed button-up and slacks, with a name badge that read James Elwood Facilities Manager, Community Outreach Division. He blinked down at it, still not used to the new weight of the title. It wasn't the title that felt heavy, though it was what it meant. It meant someone had noticed. That kindness had a consequence. That doing the right thing in silence could still echo loudly. Dad, Zoe whispered beside him, tugging his sleeve. "You're going to be late for your own welcome lunch." James chuckled. "Didn't think those were for people like me." "They are now." She grinned. "You changed the rules." As they walked toward the elevator, James noticed small things that had changed since he first entered this building. Years ago, nods from employees who used to pass him by. A friendly wave from the cafeteria chef. Even the security guard called out, "Looking sharp, Mr. Elwood." But the biggest change wasn't in them, it was in him. He was no longer shrinking into his work. He stood tall, not because of the badge, but because he finally believed he belonged. Upstairs, his new office was modest, but bright, with a small framed drawing sitting on the desk. It showed a rocket scribbled stars and a stick figure dad holding a glowing mop saber. At the bottom, Zoe had signed it, "To the man who always cleans up everyone's messes, even when no one says thanks." That afternoon, James met with his first group of apprentices, young people who had dropped out of school, immigrants trying to find work, single parents like himself. He greeted each one with a smile that said, "I've been where you are." Zoe waited by the door proud, because her dad didn't just start a new job. He began a new mission. It had been exactly 1 year. James woke to the scent of pancakes, not the frozen kind he used to microwave, but real ones. Fluffy, warm, shaped like stars. Zoe, now 9 and taller by a good inch, stood proudly in the kitchen, wearing a chef's apron 3 sizes too big. "You're not working today," she said with a smirk. "Not even allowed to look at your email." James laughed. "Bossy much?" She winked. "I learned from the best." Later that morning, he stepped into the community center, once abandoned, now transformed into a repair and training hub, run by Crane Tech and staffed by people who, like James, had once fallen through the cracks. Apprentices called out greetings. Some even wore matching Rocket Dad pins Zoe had designed. At noon, a hush fell across the main hall. From behind the workbenches, a curtain parted, and up came a projection screen with a photo of James from last year's surprise party, eyes wide cake, mid-slice, Zoe holding up her candle star. Then came the video messages. One by one, people appeared on screen. The single mom James trained to fix elevators. The retired janitor he replaced, who now volunteers full-time. Even Madeline, the CEO, who called in from Europe with a simple message. "Thanks for reminding us that showing up matters." James rubbed his eyes. At the end, Zoe stood in the center with a new banner in her hands. It read, "Happy birthday, Dad. You didn't miss this one, and neither did we." And just like that, what used to be a forgotten day had become a celebration of all he gave and all that had quietly returned to him. Because some birthdays aren't just about growing older. They're about growing seen. In a world that often rewards noise and overlooks quiet sacrifice, James's story reminds us of a deeper truth: that unseen goodness still matters. That the smallest acts, a skipped birthday, a borrowed umbrella, a whispered thank you, can ripple into lives transformed. He didn't seek recognition. He sought to provide. But in showing up for others, others finally showed up for him. And in that full circle of love, labor, and quiet grace, a single dad became something more than a role. He became a light. James worked double shifts at the warehouse, missing his own birthday yet again to put food on the table. What he didn't know: his 9-year-old daughter Zoe had been secretly texting someone labeled CEO in his phone for weeks.